Hey everybody, this is John for MTG Nexus. If those of you that are new to the channel for the Pioneer content, I primarily have been in the past a modern burn content creator. Pioneer has gotten my interest as I've been looking to the future here. One thing as a content creator you have to realize is that sometimes content becomes obsolete, and with the leakage of things like historic and arena and such, it did seem as if there was a point in time where Wizards might move away from Magic Online, might move away from modern, legacy, etc. as being content acceptable for viewers and such, or content viewers really want to see. So as a content creator, I've been looking to the future sometimes as to what would be the next thing I would move on to. Should Modern and Burn stop being supporting? And that's why at times I've dabbled into Arena. I've dabbled into different things a little bit. So that being said, Pioneer was introduced yesterday. For those of you that don't know what Pioneer is a format that is starting with Return to Ravnica moving forward. Currently, the only thing banned in the format is the fetch lands. They don't want decks having extremely good mana. People, being able to just throw all the greatest cards of all colors in one deck. So I'm going to start testing out some different matchups and stuff, different potential decks. Today we are doing Burn versus Blue-White Dragons. Not very imaginative, I know. But this has primarily been a Burn channel in Modern, and I will continue to do a ton of Burn content for Modern, as well as Visit Phoenix, as I have been doing over the recent months. As far as other channels that I've created a couple other channels in the past. I have a standard channel that I really haven't been consistently putting out content on, but that channel probably will not be getting any content for the foreseeable future until we see how Pioneer and Modern shake out in terms of popularity and such. My focus will primarily be on some Pioneer content as well as some Modern Burn content primarily, and still a little bit occasional Is It Phoenix videos. That said, I want to welcome everybody to the channel. If you're a continuing viewer, I want to thank you for your support and understanding that as a content creator, I have to continue to update my arsenal or potentially become obsolete. But that said, we're starting out with Boros Burn. This is the deck we'll be playing from our perspective against an opponent who is playing a Blue-White Dragons list. You'll notice there are some cards similar into Modern Boros Burn versus Boros Burn in Pioneer. This is a list produced by Frank Karsten over on channelfireball.com. So this is not my particular list. Neither of these lists are actually mine. But as far as the Boros Burn list, you've got Swiftspear, Modern Staple, Soulscar Mage, for those of you that were familiar with the red-black aggro list. Also the Mono Red Prowess in Modern. You're familiar with Soulscar Mage. Very powerful card, but does have the drawback of not having haste. And then the other one drop in the deck is Bomat Courier. This card can accrue advantage over time, and one of the things in this format that's kind of lacking outside of red is consistent 1-mana removal. So this card could potentially accrue some value. Wild Slash is kind of your shock with upside. Shock is your 5th kind of 1-mana play without a true lightning bolt in the format, or without playing a high wizard count. You really don't have any reliable 1-drop burn spells in the format, which is one thing that does make this deck a little bit weaker than its modern counterpart. As far as 2-drops, Eidolon the Great Revel, and this card feels like it's been around forever, but it was printed in Journey into Nyx, therefore it is legal in this format. It's been a burn staple for a long time. I have a feeling it will continue to be so even in this format. Admiral Carol Keep is kind of the final inclusion in the main deck. Some bird decks I've been seeing people posting have gone up to things like Chain Whirler or Rampaging Frostodon in the main deck. I don't know if that's correct. I think you want to be a little bit lower to the ground. Abbott gives you a little bit of play on turns 3 and 4. Allows you to kind of refill your hand, or refill a little bit. It's kind of a 2-for-1 this deck kind of needs and to hang potentially in this format. Searing Blood, kind of the pseudo Searing Blaze in this format. Remains to be seen if it'll be good if there's a lot of creatures that's this ticking tag or not. Boros Charm, we all know how powerful that is. One of the big things that Boros Charm will be powerful in this format is, while a lot of modern decks have moved away from sweepers and such, as they're often not that good, the spot removal in this format isn't going to be great. There's going to be a lot of 2 reliance on 2 mana removal, and that means that sweepers are going to be a little bit more of a premium, so the indestructible ability on Boros Charm can be relevant, especially in the matchup we're playing today. Lay up the stage. This card gets a lot of flack in the modern builds, however I think in the Pioneer builds it will be a staple, at least for the short term, until better burn spells are printed. Skewer the Critics, obviously this card needs no introduction. One interesting card though, it may not make it into every build of burn, but I think one with a little bit heavier creature count like this one. Soak the Flames, it's a 4 damage spell that has a Convoke ability, so if you have like Abbot of Carol Keep or Eidolon or other, maybe a Soulscar Mage, that can't attack on a particular turn, or you can't attack into a big creature or something. You can use it to help cast Stoke the Flames. Interesting card. Interested to see how this plays out, but beyond that, nothing too special about this card. Sideboard, obviously everybody's kind of guessing what's going on in the format. It's really kind of hard to tell early on. A lot of different deck possibilities. Rest in Peace for any type of graveyard. Rally the Ancestors kind of shenanigans, or just like busted graveyard-based combo. Maybe some of the Emery decks and stuff can pop up. There's a lot of different things that Rest in Peace could potentially hit. Remains to be seen how the format hits. Hazoret's kind of for your grindier matchups, so decks with a lot of removal, etc. Chain Whirler could be an interesting spot. Could be if there's any type of token decks to pop up. Could be reasonable against any decks with a bunch of X1s, etc. Ferocitodon and Skullcrack are kind of your anti-life gain package. Ferocitodon can hit token decks as well. Bone Crusher Giant's a built-in 2-for-1. Remains to be seen if this card could be in the main deck or in the sideboard. I know Deichi Dryden's been messing around with this card in Modern. And then Deflecting Palm obviously is a pretty solid card against any type of big creature or something your opponent's trying to win with. Hitting an Emrakul or something, if your opponent hits it off an Aetherworks Marble, can be pretty devastating. Granted, they might see it coming, but Deflecting Palm is definitely a card that could be pretty decent in a format where it's probably going to be largely creature dominated, be it either big creatures or whatever. Anyways, on to the deck tech for the deck we'll be playing against today. So the deck we're going to be playing against today is a Blue-White Dragons list put together by a local store owner of the LCG that I play at. This is a Blue-White Dragons list. He even said that he probably feels it should eventually end up being Esper, but just kind of a starting point, see how viable control is, how would you maybe go about building a control deck. This is one of a couple different variants. You could do a more traditional Blue-White control list. This deck is aiming to leverage Dragonlord Ojutai to kind of close out games quickly, and the synergy with Silumgar Scorn. Basically, if you have Silumgar Scorn and either a Ojutai in play or a Ojutai in your hand, it's basically a counterspell, which I messed around with it back in the day in Modern on my old channel. It was a powerful combination. The deck didn't feel quite strong enough, but that was a point in time before like all these other powerful blue-white enablers were printed in Modern, like Narset, Teferi, before Big Teferi was printed, before Jace the Mind Sculptor was unbanned. So this was a while ago, but a lot of those cards make a return in this deck. You have Teferi, Time Raveler, and Narset. These cards really need no introduction. They've dominated Standard for a while. They've dominated Modern. Some of them are even seeing play in Legacy. So very powerful cards. Probably a good starting point for card advantage. One copy of Big Tef here is kind of a fifth way to kind of close out the game / gain perpetual card advantage. Then you have Baby Jace, Finn's Prodigy. This is basically a Merfolk looter on the first couple turns of the game, and then once it flips, it allows you to flashback spells in your graveyard. One of the problems with the blue-white thing is you really don't have any truly good spells to flash back other than maybe Supreme Verdict and Dig Through Time, because most of your good spells are Absorb, Silumgar Scorn, etc. One of the big issues with blue-white control is the lack of really good removal. You've got things like Seal Away, you got things like, what is the name of the card? It's a sorcery speed, exile all cards of a name. If they're non-token tokens, the owner gets a clue. Declaration in Stone. So, blue-white, that's one problem with blue-white, is it doesn't have like real good one-mana removal. So it's kind of relying on things like Seal Away and Supreme Verdict to deal with actually resolved creature threats. Beyond that, you've got a pile of counterspells with Absorb and Silumgar Scorn. Absorb very powerful, especially against the matchup where it's playing against today with Burn. Ojate's command. It's a flexible command spell, not quite as good as Cryptic, but still pretty good in the deck with Jace. Can be used to draw a card, can be used to get back Jace, can be used to counter a creature spell, gain 4 life. It's pretty flexible, not as powerful, but pretty flexible. And then one of the cards that's probably one of the biggest risks of getting banned is Dig Through Time. This card, for those of you that have never played it, is probably the most powerful control search spell enabled in most Eternal formats. It's literally banned in both Legacy and Modern. The only reason it's probably not immediately being banned in Pioneer is the fact that they banned the fetch lands instead, which a lot of people have joked. I've even heard more powerful or more notable Magic commentators like Jeff Hoagland saying that fetch lands need banned in Modern, etc., or should be banned in Modern, etc. But yeah, really enables the delve threats or delve things, and I think this card being enabled in the format could be pretty good. A lot of times it looks like it's going to be a 3-mana, 4-mana spell, unless you're playing like some type of turbo mill deck or something. So going to be a lot harder to enable this card, but still very, very powerful. Turn 5, turn 6, refilling your hand. Beyond that, onto the sideboard. Got a couple rest in pieces, same reason that we had him in the Boros deck. You don't know what you're going to be facing against. Getting the Trials, pretty relevant against Burn and other aggressive decks, but can also shut down bigger threats. Come down, neutralize a threat, force your opponent to commit hard to the board. Getting Zendikar, kind of a mid-range killer here. Constantly stringing out 2/2s, or it can be a 5/5 beater. So Settle the Wreckage as an additional sweepers to Supreme Verdict. Lyra Dawnbringer. This card really needs no introduction against decks like Burn and such. Very, very powerful card. Also pretty good in the mid-range decks. Thanks to the final words, kind of an interesting one. I think this is kind of a go-over-the-top control thing. Disdainful Strokes for the more difficult to deal with spells, and then 2 copies of Dovin's Veto when you need negates. That's pretty much what the deck will be playing against, and so on to the matches. So we are back here for Game 1, Match Number 1. So for those of you who aren't familiar with my Versus videos, I tend to do things from the perspective of one of the decks, so you get to see both sides of the matchup. If there's an interest, I could potentially do the replay from the other side, as I have access to the account that matchup was played on. But this is primarily from the Burn side of the equation, so keep that in mind when you're watching the matchup. This is how I do my Burn Versus videos, but it's just easier to play the matches and then do the commentating later, especially in play matchups. So the play is not going to always be the tightest. This was more gameplay, get a feel for how matches play out, if decks are viable, etc., more than technical play and such. Just keep that in mind as we're going through the matchups. I will go over sideboarding from the Burn perspective, and then show maybe if there's interest in these videos, I'll show the blue-white versus this perspective. So, anyways, on to first hand. This hand's pretty interesting. We have a 1-drop, especially with haste. We have some burn spells, so hand's pretty solid, especially on the play. Get the Bomat Courier down, start pressuring our opponent. Bomat Courier, especially against a deck that can't answer it pretty quickly, can be pretty devastating. One of the things here is when you're playing light up the stage, and I make mistakes with this later in the video, so I'm not perfect with this, is you want to try to attack with your creature first to trigger light up the stage, so in case you hit a land off of light up the stage, you can play it kind of like that. And then using Skewer the Critics just to be mana efficient this turn, especially when you have a card like Abbot of Carol keep going down. So one of the things with Abbot is obviously I don't have the luxury of playing it next turn, so I have to play it this turn. Was playing it first, hoping to hit a land, because you can play a land off of Abbot. Unfortunately, we hit Boros Charm, but start pressuring our opponent here. Opponent does nothing. We try to Wild Slash them, trying to go for the kill here. They have Absorb. We play Boros Charm. We play this. And if you look, even through an Absorb, we're actually killing them on turn 4. So, one of the things I think is going to be important in this format is I think the aggressive decks are going to need to be capable of killing with their better draws on turn 4, because I think there's going to be a good number of combo decks. I know both Saheeli and the Aetherworks Marvel decks both have the capability of, I don't know about very consistently, but some number of turn times comboing on turn 4. Out of Aetherworks Marvel, that could mean a turn 4 Emrakul the Promised End. Out of Saheeli combo, that means you're dead if you don't have an answer to Saheeli. And so that is something to consider, is that your aggressive decks, you need to be able to either disrupt and kill on turn 5, or probably most likely be able to goldfish probably about 50% of the time at least on turn 4, and I do think Burn does have that capability. So anyways, on to sideboarding for game 1, or match 1, game number 2. So here in talking about sideboarding for game number 2, there are several cards you consider bringing in for a blue-white matchup that doesn't seem to have a lot of creatures. I think the most obvious card to board out is Searing Blood. The other card that I chose to board out was Stoke the Flames. 4 damage burn spell is obviously pretty good, but the problem with Stoke the Flames is, unless you're flooding out, you generally need a creature or 2 on the board, and against blue-white, they are probably packing at minimum Supreme Verdict. They could be packing other sweepers. So you generally want to board down on cards that rely on you being on the board necessarily. Hence why Stoke the Flames has been boarded out. Cards I boarded in: 2 copies of Rampaging Ferocitodon. We already saw Absorb out of them game 1. It's possible they have other things like Blessed Alliance in the sideboard. Lyra Dawnbringer. There are other cards they could have to gain life to get back in the game. Not even thinking about cards like Ojutai's Command and such. Bring in Skullcrack for the same reason. It's a pretty fluid burn spell against the people that aren't trying to play to the board. And then the third and final card I brought in was the 2 copies of Hazoret. Hazoret's a card you can play after something like a Supreme Verdict and possibly even take over the game. So those are the cards I chose to board in, board out, as to the reasons why. Once again, sideboarding going to be a lot harder to build sideboards and decks until the format kind of flushes out a little bit. Look at this opening hand. We're on the draw. Obviously, it's a mulligan. Got no lander. This hand's pretty good. Got 2 1-drop creatures, a couple light up the stages. I think this is kind of hand you want. Putting back the Skewer of the Critics because it's a little bit awkward with Soulscar Mage, but and 2 light up the stages, generally probably going to find what we want. Playing out the Soulscar Mage here because it's obviously doesn't have haste. Playing Swiftspear here. This might have been incorrect to play the second land before combat, but in all likelihood, I know I wanted to cast this and light up the stage this turn, so even if we hit a land here, I wanted to be able to do the thing. Opponent plays Teferi, bounces our Swiftspear. I made a mistake here. I should have played the Inspiring Vantage instead of the Battlefield Forge, but that's from not a ton of experience playing with Light Up the Stage in a while, other than the Mono-Red Prowess deck that I played. So the one thing here I want to consider is that casting Inspiring Vantage, or using Inspiring Vantage, would have been better from getting this down, and we would have had our 4th land. The thing here is, why didn't I cast Wild Slash before combat, knowing there's a Teferi in play? My plan this turn was to kill the Teferi, to hit them for 1, trigger Light Up the Stage. So that's what we're going to do. Setting up for a big turn next turn. Unfortunately, we hit a bunch of lands. Our opponent chooses to steal away. Unfortunately for them, they miss a land drop. We go ahead and cast a Boros Charm, cast a Wild Slash, cast another Wild Slash. Each one of those cards gets a +1. Obviously, our opponent really can't interact with only 1 mana. White mana, there's no Path to Exile or any type of oust or anything in this format, so not a whole lot our opponent can do. Opponent plays a Teferi, bounces our Swiftspear. We play an Abbot, see a Bomat Courier, play out that, hit them for 2 here. I could have knocked out Teferi, but there's not really a whole lot Teferi can do this turn, other than plus. And if they had a Supreme Verdict, they were going to get us anyway, and now it just looks like they're dead, because they're just dead on board. So, one huge thing about this Boros Burn, it does have a lot more card draw, card advantage than your typical modern Boros burn deck, but there's a lot more air in the deck because the cards aren't as good. You don't have Lightning Bolt, you don't have Lava Spike, you don't have Searing Blaze, you don't have access to Rift Bolt. So there's a lot more air in this Boros deck, and it's probably going to be a little bit more reliant on creatures, a la the standard decks of the last several years. But still very powerful. You saw in game number 1, it's capable of winning on turn 4, even through a little bit of disruption. So the deck can be very powerful. Blue-white, a little bit clunky, a little bit, you saw it missing land drops here. It probably has Supreme Verdict in hand, which certainly would have come in handy, but, that's one of the things when you're playing against, in fact, they did have a Supreme Verdict they revealed off the Narset. So, something to keep in mind when you're building control is, if you're not red-based or black-based, or don't have those colors in your deck, if you're mainly blue-white, you're not going to have access to any one-mana removal, so aggro decks can potentially get under you. You need to keep that in mind when you're building your decks, in addition to fighting, all the Saheelis and the Aetherworks Marvels and the Hardened Scales and the Emerys and whatnot that you need to keep in mind. The aggro decks can still get under you. So this format could potentially be very interesting moving forward. I guess we'll see that. But we've got one more match for you. I'm playing 2 matches of this matchup, so stay tuned for that. Be back in 1 minute. Back here for the second match. We're on the draw from the burn side here. Hand's still pretty solid. Lots of creatures, some burn spells, a little bit of pressure. We lead on Soulscar Mage for some reason I discussed in game number 1. You want to get your unhasted threat down. I could have done Wild Slash here, but it goes for Steal Away on our Pomat Courier. Makes sense, that's a card advantage source if they can't kill it soon. Using the Skewer the Critics while we can here. Opponent does Teferi, bounces the Soulscar. There's one disadvantage to having the more or less haste-based creatures is the fact that bounce effects and such are irrelevant. Played Abbott here in case we hit the land drop off of her. Just go ahead and play Soulscar Mage since we can't play Skewer the Critics. Opponents missing their, not missing their 4th land drop here, but not having the ability to cast Supreme Verdict because if it comes into play tap land. So here I opt to kill Teferi and deal 2 damage to them just to keep us from having to deal with instant speed Supreme Verdicts. Try to play layup stage here. Our opponent has Absorb, which is unfortunate, but they have a Verdict. Now we're kind of left without a bunch of stuff to do. Play Wild Slash into layup the stage here. We have an Abbott next turn. Opponent plays Dragonlord Ojutai. This is one of the advantages of the Dragon style of control deck. They have the ability to close out the game fairly quickly. Play a Jaceven's Prodigy. Another Absorb, and I opt to scoop it up here. It's going to be hard to beat this, especially since we don't have any actual spells in hand. We're flooding out pretty badly. It's one of the disadvantages of playing Burn without having access to Horizon lands like you do in Modern. And if you can't get on the board, there's no chance of racing an Ojutai and the card advantage that it produces. Those that aren't familiar, basically, every time Ojutai connects with a player, the opponent looks at the top 3 cards of their... They look at the controller of Dragonlord Ojutai looks at the top 3 cards of their hand, and then has the ability to pick one of those 3. So it's an everlasting source of card advantage pretty much as long as it's dealing damage. So very hard to beat this, and the fact that it has hexproof once untap means it's very difficult to deal with when it comes down, outside of obviously countering it or killing it in response to its first attack. But once they get that train rolling, especially with a bunch of Silumgar Scorns and Absorbs in their deck, it's kind of hard to kill it in a timely manner. And we're just kind of already expend our resources. Our opponent had this Teferi and the Supreme Verdict, so unfortunately that's how it goes sometimes. So anyways, on to sideboarding and game number 2. Alright, sideboarded much the same as last time. Boarded out the Stoke the Flames once again. Kind of hard to play the board when your opponent has a bunch of sweepers. Could potentially bring in Bone Crusher Giant, but I don't think a 4-3 when the shock's not all that relevant in the matchup. Even though it is potentially a 2-for-1, I don't think a 4-3 with no haste is really particularly relevant in this matchup. Chain Whirler, once again, could bring that in to nug like Teferis and stuff, but doesn't feel like it's the best position in this matchup. Stirring Blood's the only potential target we've seen out of them in either matchup is Jace, and I don't even know if they'll leave in Jace against us. So, bring in the Skullcracks, bring in the Frostodons, help try to prevent the life gain, and then board in the 2 copies of Hazaret, because it potentially has haste, and it's a much more harder to answer threat. We're on the play this game, which obviously is a positive. Once again, this hand seems pretty solid. This deck is more creature reliant than Modern Burn, so getting your creatures down is important. We get to see Eidolon for the first time in this matchup as well. Once again, could argue I should be leading on Monastery Swiftspear, since our second turn is most likely going to be Eidolon here. But go ahead and get Eidolon down. They do the thing. We play the Abbot, trying to hit a land drop here. Continue to pressure our opponent. It's possible I should have played Boros Charm and whatnot. Opponent goes Teferi, bounces Eidolon. Seems like they're trying to set up Supreme Verdict here, because Abbot, obviously, while it is a recurable source of card advantage, for us does not have haste. So, potential they could have set up bouncing Eidolon here. They might not want us to replay Eidolon post-Verdict, although I do think it was probably correct for them to bounce the Eidolon rather than the Abbot. Here, I opt to kill Teferi, much like last time discussions, is you don't want instant speed verdicts if you can prevent it. So Teferi is a little bit more relevant in this format than it is, say, in Modern necessarily for us to kill, especially when we're holding with a hand of a couple Boros Charms here. So I choose to leave up Boros Charm to protect against Supreme Verdict. Opponent has Verdict. We have the Boros Charm. Just passing along, and then we pretty much go for the kill here. Keeping in mind, when you have prowess creatures in play, your burn spells each deal +1 damage for each spell. So Shock deals 4, Boros Charm deals 5. So keeping that in mind, we easily have lethal here on turn 5, even through a Teferi bounce and a Supreme Verdict. So this kind of shows what I'm talking about with Burn, is it's a little bit different to play than the Modern variant. And also from the blue-white control side, the severe lack of 1 and 2 mana interaction outside of counter spells potentially makes it hard for these decks to necessarily deal with, especially on the play. Aggro decks, especially the red-based aggro deck draws, and even possibly like mono-white aggro if they have like some type of like way to prevent damage, etc., or way to prevent a sweeper. So if you're trying to build a blue-white control deck in the format, you kind of have to keep in mind that you are going to be softer to the hard aggro decks. You're gonna have a solid mana base, you're gonna have good counter spells, etc., but you are going to be weaker to the fast aggro decks of the format, things like mono white, things like mono red, Atarka, goblins, any of those decks that pop up, you might be a little bit softer to decks that can load up on 1-drops and get under your counter spells. So, anyways, on to the third and deciding game in this second match. We're here on the draw for game number 3. Could potentially keep this hand, but I do think a hand with 4 lands and obviously without having access to things like the Sunbaked Canyons in this format, I think 4 lands is too much, even with potential of Bomat, Courier, and Layup a stage. So I choose to mulligan this hand. Could be wrong. I keep this hand. 2-lander, not exactly a lot of early pressure, but I bottom the Hazaret. It's possible I should have kept that card. It does give us a mana sink in the late game, and outs to things like our opponent Supreme Verdicting us away. They have Teferi here. I chose to play Boros Charm on 2 just to be mana efficient. Same thing when I said with Abbot. You want to play it before you play your land drop if possible, in case you hit a land off of it. Opponent goes ahead and bounces it. They don't hit a land drop, which is noticeable. Does seem like they have a counterspell here. They absorb us. We Wild Slash to get the Teferi off the board. They just play another Teferi, take it up. We play another Abbot. We see Layup the Stage, which we go ahead and play off of the Boros Charm. See a Swiftspear here. Opponent just plays their cards. Play Swiss Spear, they have Absorb, so it looks like they don't have a Supreme Verdict right now. They have Seal Away, though. It just continues to... They draw a card this time, I guess. So we go ahead and play that, play a Bum Mat Courier, try to attack here. Opponent has another Seal Away, doing a response to the draw. Play our Soulscar Mage. And at this point, we're just kind of playing a draw-go game that doesn't really favor us because we're low on resources and we're flooding out very badly. Tried to kill the Teferi here just to get their source of card advantage off the table. It's not the fastest source of card advantage in the world, but nevertheless, it can be annoying, and we just kind of play a long game of draw-go here. Once again, doesn't favor us. Our opponent starts, gain card advantage with Narset a little bit. Here they're looking for a more perpetual source of card advantage. Just hold our burn spells. They play another Teferi. Still trying to draw some spells. Probably just looking for a way to close out the game at this point. You see an Ojutai's command. We play into it, but not really a whole lot we can do. We got to get it out of their hand eventually. And then there's kind of finally their win con, getting into the trials. Opponent just goes for the Supreme Verdict. Doesn't want us to even get a chump block, and then just starts closing the game out with this guy. We try for lay up the stage. It gets Dovin's Veto, and that I just kind of concede because they have a win con in play. They have a couple counter spells most likely at this point. They have another Supreme Verdict. It's just unlikely we're going to be able to run off enough cards to kill them from this point. Once again, if I would have kept the Hazoret, maybe we could have found a way to close out the game, but without really a way to shuffle that Hazoret back into our deck. We only have one other, plus our opponent has counter spells, so there's a decent chance we wouldn't be able to resolve it anyway. Maybe that would have been one reason to play out our lands a little bit more aggressively. But that's when you kind of get caught in that old burn pattern of holding spells in your hand against blue-white control to try to kill them. But, when you keep drawing lands, it's really kind of hard to burn them out, and they're at 22. So, wanted to show these couple of matchups, thought process on the games. Burn can get under blue-white control. Blue-white still does have the ability to win a longer game against red aggressive decks, etc. So, something to keep in mind as you're playing these games, especially early on in the format, is take everything with a grain of salt. Learn the overall arching methods, not necessarily if the deck's good or not in a particular matchup, because you can always shift cards around. But the question becomes how does your deck overall perform in the format? Be it against aggro decks, be it against combo decks, be it against different strategies that might pop up. Keeping in mind, I think if I had to guess, I would say the baseline for Pioneer is going to be turn 4. Burn's capable of turn 4 kills. Aetherworks Marvel's capable of turn 4 combo. Saheeli is capable of turn 4 combo. So unless there's some bans, because the deck's too OP, or something just proves to be too consistent, or whatever, or they don't want those combos in the deck, or combos in the format, there is disruption in the format. You have things like all the 2-mana counter spells that have been being printed. You have Thought Seizes in the format potentially. So there is disruption in this format that doesn't guarantee the turn 4 combo decks are going to be completely rampant, but they are something to keep in mind. That and the aggressive decks all are capable of turn 4 virtual wins, turn 4 virtual kills. You'll be seeing things like potentially Scapeshift decks pop up with Field of the Dead, etc. So there's going to be a lot of powerful stuff going on in this format. Blue-white control and burn are always something people want to know where they're at in the format. I squared them off against each other because they're probably two of the easier decks to build early in a format in terms of cards that might slot into different things. But I want us to give a special thanks out to Tom for his deck list. Special thanks to Frank Karsten for giving this particular Boros burn list. Once again, if you like Pioneer content and want to see more Pioneer content, don't forget to hit that like and subscribe buttons. I'm going to be doing some Pioneer content here in the early going, see how it goes. But keeping in mind, this is primarily a modern burn channel, so a lot of my Pioneer content is going to be skewed towards aggressive decks. But I will be doing Pioneer content moving forward, and also continuing doing our modern content. As always, I want to thank everybody for tuning in. This has been John for MTG Nexus. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe down below.